This is the Demystifying the MFA Application Process Workshop. We're super excited to be here. The first step in your process is self-reflection. And I know you've probably already been thinking about graduate school. I assume if you're here, you're thinking, you've already been doing a little bit of this. But I can't stress it enough because it's pretty critical that you give some thought to asking questions like, why? Why do you want to go to graduate school? And what do you hope to get out of it? Really spending some time with those questions and digging in is going to be of assistance to you throughout the whole entire process of applying. It's also going to play a giant role once you get to graduate school. And so I definitely, as a first exercise, we both recommend that you engage in some structured or unstructured self-reflection. Things like ask yourself, what are your strengths? What are things that you want to work on while you're in graduate school? Really try and assess where you are in your career at this moment, right? You might be just finishing undergraduate. It might be a few years after undergraduate. It might be many years after undergraduate. And so really taking stock of where you are and what you hope to achieve out of it is pretty big. Noelle, do you want to maybe add to that or?
Yeah, I really think that one of the things that we've all talked about and I've talked about with my colleagues in terms of people coming to graduate school unprepared is that oftentimes I think after getting out of undergrad, people think they need to go straight to graduate school. And what we found is oftentimes those students aren't prepared to go to graduate school in the visual arts. That taking a year to really figure out what it is you want to do with your life before making this decision is always advisable.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Oh, I guess I moved on. Sorry. Noelle, did you want to introduce this slide or?
Yeah, sure. So what kind of things can graduate school provide? Mentorship, networking, focus, credentials, a peer group, new skills, study abroad. All of these things that you see here are really good things that grad school can give to you that you might not get outside of it. One thing you shouldn't see grad school is a stopgap or a kind of compulsory thing that you have to do. You should really identify the reasons that you want to go to graduate school before applying to graduate school. You may evaluate that and realize that you don't need graduate school. I know plenty of working artists who went straight to New York and got on a truck and started hanging art and learned got all of these things or got a lot of these things through that process of just being a working artist in a major art city. So really figure out what it is that graduate school can provide for you that you can't get somewhere else before you end up paying $150,000 to go to graduate school. So.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Noelle. Just to kind of jump in on this too, like it's really I think just to really drive home the seriousness of this, of the self-reflect, really ask, some of these the bullets that we've put up here, you notice that some of them are larger than others, and that's because I think some of these are if I think that these are some of the reasons that are really strong reasons to go to graduate school, just to be honest. And so if you're finding things that you need that are not on this list, or if you look at that list and you're like, yeah, I already got all that stuff, I do think you have to think about that. And I think it's worth it because for me, part of the application process, part of why I'm doing even this is I want to try and help people. For me, the teaching process is for students, whoever they are, whether they're currently enrolled or beyond. And so part of your success in whatever graduate experience or whatever career trajectory you're choosing to head into is, it's an educational experience. And so I want to make sure that that you have options and to not feel obligated to have to do this thing, though there's a lot of pressures and a lot of voices out there. You'll notice that the biggest and boldest one on here is mentorship. And I think, and some of the others like peer group and focus and discourse, like actual conversation with people, is pretty big. I mean, there's times when after undergrad, when maybe you're taking that year or two, when you might start to say, hey, wait a minute, like I'm making art and I'm all alone and I have no one I'm actually having conversations with about art. That's a pretty typical thing that people will say, and it's a pretty good reason, to think about it. So again, think in these terms, what types of goals you have, and think about, again, strengths and weaknesses. But I'll move on to the next slide.
Yeah, so having a clear sense of your goals will improve every aspect of your graduate experience. So, the 4 bullet points that we have here, which we're going to go in to a little bit more in depth in the following slides, are how to research and evaluate programs, how to prepare and organize your portfolio, writing applications and statements, and how to secure effective reference letters. So I guess we can just move on, Paul.
Okay. Yeah, I'll do that.
Let's jump right in.
So, yeah, so researching programs, as you might guess, or I hope you should guess, and you should really feel comfortable in doing this, the first step is start talking with people. I mean, you're going to have advisors, mentors, faculty that you trust. I would say that I'm like asking somebody you trust who's been teaching and has worked with you and knows you and knows your goals, or that you at least you feel free to share your goals with, is one of the big ones. It should be your first stop. I say this in comparison to some of the other online ways that you probably will also look, which also need to play a role. But I'd say my first stop would definitely be talking with other artists and professors and people that you care about, who care about you, to find out what programs that they suggest.
When I applied to graduate school, I asked my sort of faculty mentor at the time, I gave him kind of a list of schools that I was interested in applying to, and he picked 2 of them off the list and he said, those are good for you. The rest of them are too conservative. And so I didn't apply to those schools. I only applied to the 2 he told me to apply to. Unfortunately, I got in, but I was like ready to apply the next year had I not. So yeah, fortunately I had somebody who was frank enough to say, like, those schools are not going to be what you want. So find somebody who's willing to be frank with you about that.
Totally agree with Noelle. It's like so important. And I hope already you have some people in mind who feel like they fit that bill. And similar story on my end as well. Not to mention, I even had, just to go a little bit further though, it's not the only source. And so, I also had some advisors who I trusted who recommended certain schools that I ended up not going to, even though I got in. And that's its own kind of thing to negotiate, because you also have to know yourself, even more than whoever the advisor is in the trust. I would say you do have to balance it out with your internal compass, really, because we know that sometimes we might have advisors who we really trust, but they're not also inside of our head. They can't live our lives for us. So you do have to be, you have to steer this ship. That's what is going to be expected of you in graduate school, is to really be making your own informed choices. And so I think just wanted to expand on that a little bit. Google, obviously, I think a lot of people go there first and start like typing in city names and MFA programs, and that's good. But really, I think you need to talk to people. I think you need to avoid like lists. I think you really just need to compile names and features that seem interesting to you, and then ask around, because there's even a site.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Noelle.
Oh, I was just going to say, one of the things that people often consult is that U.S. News and World Report list that comes out. That's not based on any criteria, right? Like, that's just so you guys have an idea of how that list works. It's based on word of mouth and not based on any kind of objective criteria or evaluation. So oftentimes, people are just voting for that based on something they've heard or a reputation or an obvious kind of large name that they know, and not really based on the value or any kind of quantitative elements about the program.
Yeah, Noah, you really nailed it. Like, this was exactly what I was going to get at. It's just like, you know, those lists, and they can be, if you're not familiar with the names at all, maybe it is a good place to start. Though I have to say, like, at that level, you might look at something like the Art and Education eFlux Journal, which has all these advertisements for calls for applications that goes out, and you can search that archive. So you can come up with names that are, you know, sort of a raw list that you then are talking to people about. Anyway, up to the next slide, which continues this idea.
So how to research and evaluate programs. First thing you should look at is, who are the faculty teaching in that program? Are they people that you respect their work and seem like interesting mentors that you would want to work with? It is probably the biggest thing that astounds us is when we have a grad student who applies to the program and doesn't know a single name of the faculty who work there, because you're going to spend a lot of money and a lot of time with these people. You should know who it is you're getting yourself in the ship with. Spoken to them, reach out to them. Many of them will set up a meeting with you via Skype. Many of them will meet with you in person. If you can meet in person, that's a great idea. It's a good way of getting to know that person. And then you have one person who can vouch for you in the meeting, you know, where people are deciding on, you have an insider, essentially, if you've met with them. How is the program curriculum structured? So is it a conservatory style program like we have, which is interdisciplinary, where there is no one meets medium specific requirements, but everyone is all over the place in terms of what they're working with. There's no barriers to what you can work with, and all meet with every grad student? Or is it very medium specific, where you're in a photography program and you will meet only with other photography faculty members and students? You're oftentimes in photo and ceramics programs. These programs might be even segregated campuses. So structurally, like, what does it look like? Are you all up in a mix together or no? So attend a campus visit. Again, I already addressed that. How is the program and institution responding to the pandemic? Obviously, maybe by next year we won't be dealing with it in the same way that we're dealing with it now, but it's probably a good idea to see what your MFA experience is going to be like in a pandemic. So can you meet students in the program or alumni from the program? This is incredibly helpful. Get the name of some students who would be willing to talk to you about what their experience is like currently. And also graduates of the program, but recent graduates, maybe 1 or 2 years out, and they can really speak to a kind of reflection on the program that they went through. So both of those, having one of each or more of each is a good idea to reach out to. Where is the school? What is the location like? Is it a rural campus, or is it something that is in a major city? Is it a place that you would want to live for longer than graduate school? Because oftentimes people end up making a life in the place that they went to graduate school. If you know for a fact you're the kind of person that wants to go to a small rural place and get a really intense experience and then move immediately afterwards, that can work for you. But oftentimes, think about the fact that you might be working in the city that you're going to graduate school immediately after, or maybe you'll spend the 20 years of your life there. So that's something to consider. So we kind of touched on the medium specific or interdisciplinary aspect of graduate school. What type of institution is it? Is it a public institution, a private institution, an art school? Is it a research school? All of these are going to affect the type of program you participate in. When you go to a large public university like the one that I work at, you have access to resources which are dramatically different than the ones that you have access to at, say, a private art school. I've had students go over and work with the electron microscopes in the biology department to make images. There's, we have a visual imaging center that's really specific, which they allow us to use on a regular basis. So you have these accesses, you have an access to a type of research-based work that you might not have in a private art school. Also, it can come with public funding versus the private art school, which might not have public funding. Also, scale of the school, right? A 40,000 person school is going to have a very different experience than a school that is 2,000 people. So what kind of school do you want to be a part of? So what are the facilities, shops, tools, the media center? What kind of things does the school have access to? Sometimes you might have access in a private school to private art, or private or public schools to private art museums, right? Or art museums that are attached to the campus in some respect. Having access to firsthand, primary sources in art is very important, right? Being able to look at things in person and watch the workings of a professional space in person is really, really important. And so what kinds of institutions are they connected to? And then of course, scholarships, fellowships, assistantships, and teaching opportunities. All of these things are things that are going to affect your life, not only in school, but afterwards, right? How much debt you get into, what kind of skills you have when you leave the institution. So do you have anything else to add there, Paul?
I can't emphasize enough things like really knowing who the faculty are, just giant. You might remember from the earlier slide where I talked about mentorship and it was like bolded and it was the most gigantic bullet point about what a reason to go is. Well, who are these mentors we're talking about? You should know who the people teaching in the program are. And that doesn't mean you have to love every one of their work. Honestly, sometimes, very often, people will say, oh, I really want to study with X or Y or Z. It's like this person that I'm interested in working with. Learn more about them, talk with them. That kind of thing is, of course, important because the work might not be the person. But really doing that homework, I totally love that. The location thing is,
there's also,
oh, go ahead, Noelle.
Oh, I was just, you were going to say something about location, which I think is also what I was going to get at, which is campus culture is really important. The biggest, at least one of the biggest influences on the rest of your life as an artist, and even what you're doing in grad school, is going to be your peers. And so finding out what type of campus culture there is at the schools that you're looking at is really important. If you know that you're the kind of person that needs isolation and space, and you go to a school that is essentially a big kind of party, might not, that might not be the right fit, and you should figure that out beforehand.
Yeah, Noelle, really, you went exactly where I was going to go. I was like, if there's anything that people underlook or overlook, it's this location thing where it's like, hey, I can just sink in, and what I want to do is be separated from. That's what I need, is some quiet. On the flip side, like here at Columbia in Chicago, we're an urban campus. Like people typically come here because they're like, hey, I want to immerse in a city. Yes, I'm coming to school, but I'm kind of looking for an urban experience as part of that. And so I think really knowing, do not overlook the part that you're actually going to be a living, breathing human being in the context of this thing, and that the place that you're living has a huge degree with like your satisfaction and your happiness. And let me tell you, an unhappy grad student is oftentimes has a harder time focusing on some of the tough work and tough questions that you're trying to do. So do not overlook the location, both in terms of what it would be like to live there and be there. And I know I'm really hammering this, but like also think about the fact that you're investing time and energy, and is it a place that you could imagine being there afterwards? Because you invest a lot of times in the networks there. I know at least in an urban environment, I'm always talking that up. In a rural environment, again, that might just be what you want. So just really, okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide, but I can't stress enough, the most overlooked thing, I think, other than
Location,
people not looking
location,
up
location.
faculty, is like location, location, location. All right, we've done that slide. I'm moving on. If you have questions, though, of course, put them in the, um, okay. Preparing portfolios. I kind of, I'll start this one, and then we have a list of do's and think abouts that we'll get to. You know, it goes without saying, or I hope it goes without saying, but we're saying it, so obviously we feel like we need to, which is something you should think about. The portfolio is the most important part of your application, like hands down. There's other parts, don't get me wrong, we're going to talk about some of those too, and they do play, the other parts do play a role, but very often these review processes, the first thing faculty will do will go right to the work. They, a lot of times they won't look at writing, they won't look at anything until they've seen work and have kind of like started to mentally map out, who is this person? How can I learn who they are through the work that they've shown me? And really, even in that portfolio looking process, oftentimes starts to very quickly start to chunk the applicants into, okay, strongly interested, you know, and then other categories that the faculty member is going to mentally kind of go through. I mean, a faculty member might be looking at 30, 50, 100 applications, sort of depends on the school. But before I move to the next slide, Noelle, does that, is there others on this, or do you think maybe we'll go to the...
So organizing and preparing your portfolio, focus on recent work created in the past 2 to 3 years. You're undergrads, so most likely it will be the work that you did in undergrad. So, but you know, if you take a gap year or two, it's important to continue making work in those years so that the work is current. Present a cohesive view of your practice. So this is one that I would consider important, but the word cohesive can be misunderstood. Cohesive doesn't necessarily mean, we get photographers who think cohesive means it has to all be 35mm black and white, right? Which to someone who is used to looking at an interdisciplinary practice, the difference between a black and white 35mm photograph and a digital photograph of a different shape isn't that huge of a difference. But in the photo world, that can be a lot. So I would say this word cohesive depends on the school that you're applying to. If you're applying to a school like mine, which is entirely interdisciplinary, they're not going to think twice about seeing a performance installation and then a painting, as long as the work has a kind of sensibility that comes across, right? Whereas if you're applying to a very, very conservative school in the sense of being medium specific, this idea of cohesive might be much more strict. So research your school and make your portfolio fit to the school that you research. Strong portfolios demonstrate your ability to convey conceptual thread. So this work should have it should give the faculty looking at your portfolio a sense of you. Like, what is this person about and how are they going to proceed once they get into the program? Consider the narrative flow from slide to slide. Now, narrative, okay, let's step back on that word a little bit. In photo, they use the word sequencing, which I think is maybe a little bit better word. It doesn't have to necessarily be a direct narrative, but consider what the slides look like next to each other, right? I'm going to look at, most of these are going to be done online now. I'm going to see maybe one at a time, or maybe I'm going to see what looks like a tiled kind of slide sheet, old style slide sheet. And so what do the slides look like next to each other? What is the sort of story that's told from one slide to the next? And then usually start with your strongest images and end with your strongest images. And people tend to remember the beginning and the end more than they remember the things in the middle. So your weakest images you want to put in the middle. Any other things on that narrative flow from slide to slide? Oh, stay away from, this isn't on here, but stay away from things that look like too much like assignments, right?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
No grad school application wants to see a still life unless you're Mirandy, and that's what you're going to do for your entire career, right? It wants to look like, you want your projects self-directed. You want to have a kind of, even if they were assignments, that you put something in there that makes it your work, and not that you're just following the directions of an instructor. So your portfolio should reflect your potential. I think we've spoken to that to a degree. So it's okay to include pieces or ideas that you want to develop in the context of grad school. So this would be maybe a work in progress, or something that shows where this work is going. That being said, a description of a work in writing is not acceptable for a portfolio. If you do this, it needs to be something that is in progress that you might want to develop, right? That shows the way in which you're thinking and working, not a description of the way you might work. Portfolios show a sense of the type of work you see yourself engaging in grad school. Keep in mind that the faculty often are championing applicants who look like they have promise or potential. They don't want you coming in and just making the work that you made in undergrad for 3 years and then leaving. The idea is for someone to grow. So if you show that you're the type of person who can grow and has potential and has ambition, that's going to go a long way.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, I totally agree. Thank you, Noelle. I really think this works in progress idea. I mean, you wouldn't want the whole thing to be works in progress, or, obviously you can make your own strategy, but it's not forbidden, and it really shows ability to grow, which is, that's what we're looking for, some self-direction and autonomy.
Also that you're working now.
Right, that's right.
That you're in the middle of making work.
Right. Yeah, the thing of, I also really, that it's interesting when you bring up the part of don't put in assignments, and that can be tough, but there's this thing that sometimes a portfolio will open up and the faculty will see, it's like, oh, it's like a bunch of the still lives or charcoal drawings, and it's like, okay, like you don't need to prove that you do skills. You need to demonstrate that you're thinking and taking some ownership of your ideas. And I think that the work that feels urgent to you, that's like the most visceral, like this is what I've got to make, that actually comes through when we look at a portfolio.
If you don't feel that impulse, if you aren't making work outside of the assignments, you probably shouldn't be going to grad school in the visual arts, at least not for an MFA. You need to have a certain amount of self-direction to succeed in grad school. And so it's not a degree that gives you that you have to bring to it. So if you can realize that there's a certain amount of ambition and freedom and self-direction you're going to have to bring to this program.
I did just want to, I don't know if you saw the question in the chat, but I was going to kind of, just because it's pretty specific to some of the stuff we were talking about, I'm going to address that question, which is, it's like a few questions, but they're all really important. So where should we place experimental works? And I love this because even Noelle and I were talking about this. It's like, we don't want people to think you cannot do that. But you can, in the description, you can say work in progress, study for, like the description and the title of the piece can give some directionality. And then your follow-up question in the chat, it's like, do we talk about this in the statement of purpose or artist statement? Yeah, you absolutely do. I mean, in fact, certainly if there's, especially in statement of purpose, which we have some additional slides we're going to get to, but yes, there's a narrative component usually there's going to be some written component here. And that's a great place to talk about, you know, to be direct and to be honest about those kinds of questions.
He asked like where to put it in the portfolio. I would tend to think to put it like about 3/4 down in the, so it's not your first slide, and you get people get a sense of what you do, then you hit them with the thing that you're working on now, and then you finish off with a really strong slide. In Slide Room and in a lot of the programs, you have an area where you can either write the essentially like the materials list, and you can use that space to tell people about what they're seeing. So that's usually the space that I reference if I go, what is going on here? What am I looking at, right? For whatever reason. But.
Right, and then it might also come up in a statement of purpose where you're contextualizing a trajectory. But to some of the documentation things, I think I'll take this slide. Some of these I'm gonna go quicker on just because I want to make sure we also have a bit of an open period at the very end. The biggest things, I think, the big takeaways here is excellent documentation. Like really, if it's blurry or poorly composed, really tough to deal with. And you can see how gigantic. I mean, I was like, should I make the typeface that big? Do consider hiring a photographer. It's just an enormous. It might not seem like what you need to do, but especially if you're doing 3D work and you don't have adequate lighting equipment, 3D work can really get destroyed when it is poorly lit. Oh my God. So like it might really feel like a leap, like, oh my goodness, should I really hire it? Like the investment is kind of worth it. If you're thinking grad school and you're on the fence, like I would not try and do this with your phone. I would really, again, and maybe you have those skills. You may in fact have those skills, and that's fine. But definitely get somebody else to like look over that portfolio, look at the images, make sure that other people are seeing what you're seeing. Some pitfalls just to touch on here. Do not put more than one image in a slide. Perhaps none of you will do this, but just in case it occurs to you, do not create a collage where you take like 4 or 5 images of work and like put them all into one thing. Sometimes people think, oh, I can only put 15 images and I'll make this big composite image. Don't do it. It really reflects poorly. You can't see it, and it also just it's really a pitfall. Truly, that word is the right word for it. Same thing with like putting borders or templates or weird stuff. Just show us the work, one work at a time, and let us do the review. Do put the number of images that are asked for. If you're asked for 15, put 15. If you're asked for 15 to 20, put 20. Like really make sure that whatever those numbers are that you told, you stick with, because they mean it. And then this last part, actually, and Noelle and I can tell this is going to be one where we probably talk a lot, but we've hit on it a number of ways. The issue is like there's this thing of avoiding a best of collection. What I think we're really trying to say is try to avoid making a portfolio that's just a smattering of skills. It looks a little insecure, frankly, and it looks a little all over the place. If you say, look, I draw, I paint, I do this, I do that, it can be overwhelming. On the other hand, you might in fact be an interdisciplinary artist and you see a thread of a body of work that's maybe it's a performance and it's a painting and it's a sculpture of fire, and so fine. So put those things put them together in an order, in that sequence that helps people understand that these 3 things or these 5 things that are made of different materials, in fact, are interlinked conceptually. So what you wouldn't want to do is basically show, I have 15 slides, so I'm going to show 15 absolutely different projects that are going in 15 absolutely different directions to show how versatile I am. That makes it really hard to interpret what you're up to or how you will actually focus your time.
I do think that there are some artists, if you're working conceptually, you might not be making in bodies of work, in which case you're going to have 15 different slides, right? But the through line will hopefully be a sensibility of your work that can be seen by, people who have seen a lot of conceptual art before. Hopefully
Right.
you're applying to a school that, does this, so they will understand how to read that work.
And in that case, though, the argument could be made that the through line is the method that you use. So it's methodologically,
Yeah.
the all linked together. Written components, schools are going to ask different things is the gist here. Some schools are going to ask for a statement of intent for like, why do you want to study at graduate school? Many are going to ask for an artist statement, which is a slightly different document. Some are going to have specific questions that they're expecting you to answer. If they ask specific questions, I can't stress this enough, answer those specific questions they are asking you. There's probably a reason why, and they're expecting it. Basically, follow the directions is the big move. But I think what we wanted to use these next few slides were to try and sort of distinguish some of the features of statements of intent and some big picture things. First and foremost, be concise and use clear language. Avoid being poetic. I know I bring this up. I mean, granted, I love lyricism. I do that all the time in a lot of the writing that I'm doing as an artist. I think though you have to, and it's not that you can't be lyrical, but do try and be concise and clear first. Sometimes we can fall in love with the way a thing sounds, and it can make it hard to really know what it is that you're saying. So just like let that catch in your head as you're writing. If you find yourself really, I like what this sounds like, show the writing to another person and make sure, do you know what I mean when I say this? And if they're not quite sure, then think about that, because you won't be there in the review room to be able to clarify the things that you're saying. I think I've said the bullet point number 2 already. If there's specific questions, answer them specifically. Oh, this one. Don't submit the exact same answers to each school. Really, I mean, of course, in some artist statements, it might be the same thing, but if they ask questions, really try and answer those questions. If there's a statement of intent, try and answer it for that school. Faculty are expert reviewers. It's when an answer is really recycled or it's kind of a canned answer that you're using multiple times, it really just sticks out and doesn't necessarily do you any favors. I mean, just to really expand on what I'm trying to say here, when people, a lot of times in statements of intent, there'll be a question that sounds something along the lines of, why us? Why here? Why this program? And if we get a generic answer like, oh, I really want to do graduate school, it should be things like, well, I see in your faculty list that thus and such teaches there. I really want to work with that person. Like, be direct, tell people what you're doing and show them. I mean, by the way, this one, I just have to say it. And make sure you edit, because I've seen it where it's like, it has faculty members from a different school, or it uses a different school name in a thing. And like, you'd think it wouldn't happen, but every now and then copy and paste will get you. So they definitely keep an eye on that, because it's like, it definitely is at the
Or
best.
misspells their names.
Or misspells the name of the faculty member, like just little teeny tiny things. And that's why you want to ask, mentors to read what you've written for honest feedback. Faculty, artists, honestly, professionals, we do this. Like, when I apply for jobs, I have trusted friends who I've worked with in the industry that I will say, could you just take a quick look at this? It's a totally normal practice. And, I want you to get in the habit of realizing that it's okay to ask for help, because professionals do that, and you should become comfortable with that. It's a process, by the way, of getting comfortable with asking for that type of help. But it's definitely worth it.
In addition to not being so poetic, just avoid art jargon. Every time I see a juxtapose, I snicker a little bit. There's just things that like come up over and over again. Look at your work and write about it.
Mm-hmm.
Look at your work while you are writing about it, right? It should be a reflection on what you are actually doing and not what you think you're doing. So that's an important, I think, step, is to look at your work and write on the page, my work is about, and then get the answer from the work.
It's okay to say things like, I have my own practice and I've hit a wall, and I envision graduate school as a way to refocus the questions I'm asking. that's a great statement of intent. Why are you coming? I want to move to this city and I see establishing my career there. I want to, spend these 2 years to get to know the network and expand and like refine some of these conceptual questions. I see that this person teaches there. I feel like because of these works that they've made and these experiences that are clear, I'm inspired by them, but I also want to, gain deeper insights. Really being direct and honest is the best. Oh my goodness, it's like a breath of fresh air when I read a statement where I can see, oh, okay, this person's comfortable enough with who they are and where they are in their career and their life to just tell me what's going on and how they see us being able to help them. I mean, the last thing, just on the statement of intent thing, there's a few things I'm trying to get out of it as a faculty. First, I want to understand that you can self-reflect. I want to understand that you know how to articulate directly a willingness to grow, that you're coming, like you realize like, hey, education will change me, and that, am I really ready to do that? And I guess the big picture here about the statement of intent is, I want to know, the last thing any faculty member wants is for someone to get to the school and then find out afterwards that in fact they're not ready to grow, or that they weren't really super sure about why they wanted it in the first place. And then it's just disappointing for everyone all around, and no one wants, the faculty certainly don't want, that type of disappointment. And so knowing your goals and just not feeling like you can't tell people what they are, or excuse me, I guess a different way of phrasing that is, and tell people what those goals are. If you tell me, I really want to be XYZ, and let the faculty say, oh my God, our program is super not prepared to help person reach that goal. Let us do that work. Or maybe say, oh my God, we're totally the right place. We can definitely do this. Oh my God, we love this work. Look at these set of goals. We've actually got everything that can help that person with this. So really look at it like you have a role to play in letting us know that we are the right environment to help you reach the things that matter the most to you. So, help us be your partner in that evaluation process, I suppose, is a way of looking at the statement of intent. I guess I'm going to move to artist statements just because I know Noel had more to say on that topic. And, although you did.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're kind of, how are we doing on time right now?
We're doing kind of not great. We got like 6 minutes left is the thing. And I did want to make sure we had some room for open questions.
Yeah, I think this is pretty straightforward. And once again, look at your work. What is your work about? Write it simply, plainly. Can you talk directly about the work that you're making, about its subject, its form, its context, and its content, right? All of those things should be addressed in your artist statement.
I'm going to talk about letters of reference too much, just that way we have questions. Ask people early. In here, I say 1 to 2 months. That's like etiquette-wise, you being nice. I've seen people ask 2 weeks out. That's like a last-minute request. And sometimes people will say yes, but they'll do a rushed job on it. Really strong, effective letters of reference are ones that you've asked for with ample time. So do be careful about that. And then we've got all these notes on it, but the idea is, who do you ask? You ask the art professors that you've worked with the most and people you trust. Ask professional artists if you know them. It's okay to ask former employers, but it's not the best. You want to avoid basically asking, and you might say this, like, I would never do that. Don't ask a family member, or that's just not it. These aren't character references. These are really just people who can speak to your dedication. I'll enough said on that. If there's questions about letters of reference, we can certainly address them, because that leads to our summation slide. And I want to leave this one up the most, just so that you see our email addresses. Mine's up here, Noelle's is up here. Also Ellen, again, who apologizes that she was not able to make it. It's like, you can write to us as a program director. I talk with people who do not necessarily apply to my programs. I mean, granted, I want you to, but I want you to if it's the right program. And so, program directors can really help, I think, give some characterization. And long story short is, please, if this was at all helpful and you have follow-ups that we don't get to, do not hesitate. It's not an, and don't start with like, I'm sorry to bother you. You're not bothering me. This is literally the job we do. And I'd like to educate people on the field of what does it mean to do graduate education in the arts, as well as those people who choose to come to my program. Both are important. I just want all of you to find the right spot to succeed. Great question. And it's a follow-up on our thing of the multiple images in one slide. So to answer your question, it's like what I'm hearing when I read that is it sounds like you have a work that's 5 Polaroids that maybe what you do is install them in a real actual space, take a photograph of them installed as a group of 5 in the way that you want them received by a viewer. Then perhaps the next slide would be a detail shot zoomed in on one of them, so we could, or 2 of them, or maybe even all 5, if that's if it's really critical that people see all 5 of them individually. So I think what I'm saying when I say don't do multiple images in one slide, what I'm saying is do not take 12 different photographs and then collage them into a single thing. It's that can be really,
frankly, and people will oftentimes in applications make this the point to not put multiple images on a slide. At my school, this isn't a big deal if it's like a sculpture and a detail. If it's 2 images, a sculpture and a detail in one slide, then I don't have problems with it. If it's a bunch of different works, no way.
Right.
Does that make sense? If it's the same work, okay. But if it's more than one work, no. Absolutely not.
But also, like, I suppose, and you can always, by the way, send us a note. Like if you have an example, we can, like, sometimes it's easier if we're seeing it.
Yeah.
Because I don't disagree with Noelle. There's times when it might be in the same slide,
Like a front or back,
a front and a back. Like
yeah.
I could see reasons why, or like let's say it was something that like gets destroyed in its observation, like something that you literally set on fire. That's like sort of the kind of thing that happens in my practice. Maybe you need to have like a before and after kind of thing. But
right.
It's really this idea of making a collage of like, let me put it a different way. It's not a way to say, oh, they only want 15 slides, but I've got 100 works. So I'm going to make each one of these slides filled with 5 or 7 works each.
Yeah, one work per slide. You can use multiple slides for one work, but only one work per slide.
Right.
The other problem that I see sometimes is, have you used 4 slides to show me a work that only really needed 2 images? That also looks bad, right? Your detail shot, or maybe 2 shots, maximum. You should never have more than like a pulled back work and then one, and if absolutely necessary, a second detail shot. But usually you can tell the story in one detail shot.
Right.
So limit the amount of slides you use for one work.
Yes, I found this really helpful. I did want to ask, so I am going to be receiving my bachelor's in art education, and I've only really just gotten into a regular practice with myself. And while I don't plan to apply for an MFA program within the next few years before I work as a teacher, I wanted to know if you guys have had experience with art education undergrads who come in for fine arts programs.
I have, and Noelle might also. I go out of my way to actually try and bring in people who have very different points of view. I'm actually super interested in that. We are interested as a faculty. So like, in addition to the fact that we will recruit people with art education, backgrounds, because I know that, there's a whole different degree path if you decide to do specifically graduate art education. So make sure you're not mixing those up if that's what you want, but I'm guessing that you're not. But like, just to really blow up what you're asking in a bigger way. Like I've had people who get a degree in anthropology who had a minor in art, or not even a minor in art, who just happen to have a serious practice, who, if they can show me that they have a serious practice that they're doing on their own, and frankly, ideas and concepts that they want to work on, that's the thing that matters to me far more personally, and as well in this particular program that I run. Other programs, though, you'll want to check, because some programs will only really, they might weight people with a BA or a BFA in art higher, though, I don't know off the top of my head which program that would be. But I don't know, Noelle, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, we're the same way. Honestly, whatever your undergraduate degree is in, it doesn't really matter as long as your portfolio is developed, to a certain degree. And, part of that, if you did go to programs and you know that you don't have, like, say your undergrad is in psychology, like a grad student that we have currently, right? She did a lot of self-education about contemporary photography in order to make a portfolio that looked contemporary. Because I have had people approach our program and they have no clue what's going on in contemporary painting, and they want to be in a painting MFA program. And you have to understand, you go out and read the New York Times Friday Art Review, look at contemporary painting books, and vitamin P or whatever it is that's out these days. Go online and look at what's in the Chelsea galleries or the international galleries and see like what is going on in the discipline that you are applying in, and start to have to read about that work and have a dialogue and gain the kind of understanding of like where we are within whatever medium you're applying in. The letters of intent question, I think that's acceptable to say that you're.
Yeah. I mean, it wouldn't be the only thing you would say. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it wouldn't be the only thing I would say.
The only reason.
like, I just need to get out of the house. But like, you could definitely say, I envision myself moving to, and then name the city or the town. So long story short is, no, it wouldn't be oversharing, but it would be within a texture of other foci.
It would be something that I would say is like, maybe you could mention it, but it wouldn't be the focus of your paper.
Yeah, and it looks like they understand. I'm looking at the next question down. If we are an undergraduate student who knows they want to become a professor, in addition to having a studio practice, would you still suggest taking a gap year? Yeah, that's actually, yes, I
even more so.
Think, yeah, even more so. I have to agree. I was going to try and think of other situations, but I have to say the idea of
the MFA.
Go ahead.
Oh, the MFA is not a mainline to a professorship. That's not how it works. The way that you get a job as a artist as a professor or in higher education is by being a really good artist. They're incredibly competitive, and so you need to focus on making the work the best possible work you can make in order to be able to compete at that level. And you don't get a job generally right out of grad school. You have to have a portfolio first, a CV first, which shows the people hiring you that you're going to be worth all the risk they're taking to hire you in a tenure track position. Because you may not know this, but in each department, there's a level of risk that comes with hiring somebody. And I'm not going to go into detail about that now, but it makes it difficult for them to take a chance on someone right out of graduate school. Unless that person is incredibly developed, right?
Yeah, it's it's a good question. It's an important question, right? So I'm trying to, and I'm with Noel. I'm like, oh my God, like, because there's sort of almost a whole nother 2 or 3 hour talk just wrapped up in that question. It's such an important question because, of course, even on our slide earlier, you notice that a credential, right? Because oftentimes what you'll hear is you need an MFA in order to be able to be hired as a full-time professor. There's just a lot more to that because of the scarcity of the positions at this moment, as well as a lot of other reasons that I won't get into, other than to really answer directly what you asked. It's always a good idea to take a gap year. I think it helps you. It oftentimes really gets people, it gives you enough time to reflect. Even that 1 year can sometimes be the difference between just sort of like, I guess I am going to go this route, but like, there's oftentimes this thing that we will say, it almost becomes its own rhythm, where I say something like, graduate education is very different than undergraduate education. And that's like a real shorthand that doesn't mean anything to others until they've gone through it. The expanded version of that statement is to say, you are in a role where you are expected to work more autonomously. And sometimes having a gap year between the undergraduate experience and the paradigms and the power dynamic and relationships between faculty and student that you absorb by being a student in that other mode are hard to break out of without having a gap year where you start to see yourself as making more autonomous decisions. Now, granted, you might be in a position where that's already who you are, and that's fine. But to me, there's a big part of autonomously self-directing what you're up to. That's both a part of a gap year as well as a stronger component of many components of what it means to become a professor. Sorry, I spent a lot of time on that. You're welcome, Alyssa.
It also can help you to get into school, right? When we look favorably on people who've taken that year and are still making work, because it shows that they have the self-motivation to be able to make work outside of the structure of undergrad. And so it will help you not only get into the program that you want, better deal at the program that you get into. So you might get better scholarships that way, which means you'll come out with less debt. And also it gives you an idea of what you're going to be doing the first couple of years, probably after grad school, which is working and attempting to have a studio practice at the same time. And that's what it's going to take to get to that position that you want to have as a university professor in the fine arts. It's going to take all of that. So
I guess my last, and it's sort of a different lens on the question, though I see that another one's coming in. Just the last thing on this professorship is on Alyssa's question is, I think because this is what I tell anybody who calls me and talks about when I say, what are your goals for graduate school? A lot of times people say, I want to be a professor, and that's totally reasonable. I can't stress this enough, and Noel may have a different feeling. Have other goals too. At this moment in time, it would be irresponsible of me not to really explain that, in fact, in higher education, there's a great deal of pressure, as you may know, and that's meant that, there's something, I mean, forget this year, but like over the past few years, there might be like, I don't know, 100 to 400 jobs total. And some of them might be in areas that, might be sculpture, maybe you do photo. And so the job market is radically tight. And to that end, you might say, wait a minute, and which might in fact be a thing to do, but and you'll see how I turn this into a plug for my program. And that's part of why at Columbia, we looked very carefully at the type of training that we're given. And it's why we partnered with Business and Entrepreneurship Department, because we saw that a lot of our students actually are going to go out and start businesses. They're going to be you know, doing multiple gigs. They might teach part-time. They might also have 3 or 4 businesses. They might like be doing many things and be a studio assistant. And so the reason why we just made a pretty in the field, very unique decision to partner with business, you know, after many, many conversations, it was partially because you're like, well, let's make sure we're also giving people certain career skills that give them other options other than just coming here to just, you know, land a tenure track job, which they might. By the way, many of our students have landed those, so it's not impossible, but it's not going to be a solution that works for every single person that comes to the program. And it's become even beyond just a luck situation. It's become worthwhile addressing it structurally. I guess sorry, I know there's some other questions, but I just felt, you know, obviously compelled. Noelle, either more on that or maybe one of the other questions?
Yeah, I have one last thing to say on that. In our program, we definitely look for people who say they want to be an artist, because the teaching part comes after being an artist. So it's something that, you know, is it's the program isn't an education program. It's an MFA for fine arts. You know, we expect you to engage with the kind of international contemporary art world. And so it is for our program specifically, you need to come in with the idea to be an artist, and maybe secondary to teach in an MFA program. This question down at the bottom here, not knowing what to say or what questions to ask, maybe take a second to sit down and write out a description of what you imagine the greatest graduate school experience to be like, right? And just kind of narratively write that down for yourself, like before, during, after. And then second half of the sheet, formulate them into questions, right? Is the culture, you know, how many people are in the grad school? If you imagine going to grad school with 200 graduate students, right? You might not want to be in a program with 15. If you imagine this graduate program being something that has a really lively kind of culture, right? You might want to go to a place that has that, not a place that has is a quiet kind of more introspective studio program, right? What kind of things happen after the graduate students leave? Do you have a program where most of the graduate students, you know, end up kind of working as studio assistants and, you know, moving to major art cities and working, you know, driving work around, installing, deinstalling, that kind of thing? Or does everyone become adjuncts afterwards? Or do they go and work at some kind of production facility? In LA, a lot of the sculpture, you know, students in grad school go and work for the industry, right? Building props and doing stuff like that. Like there's lots of ways that people make their way after graduate school, but school's location and the culture will have an effect on what happens most often. So I would start out writing what you think an amazing graduate school experience would be like, and then formulate it into questions and ask those questions.
Yeah, I like that a lot, Noelle, as a way to break through, because yeah, and I don't know if we got to it, but above that, I see Ginny had a question about that some schools ask for this what seems like to be a blend between a artist statement and a statement of purpose, and you're asking basically, is there a rough percentage? I think your idea of 80% artist statement and 20% the intent, because in many ways, you can be really concise with your statement of intent. It can be just 2 or 3 sentences. You know, you've heard the way we talked about it, like, hey, I've hit a wall. I think graduate school and these particular faculty are the people that are going to help me do it. I see your program as the curricular structure. It really matches up with some of the challenges and questions that I don't know how to ask about myself anymore. Something along those lines really gives us a sense that, okay, this person has an intent. Whereas it's really nice when in a blended statement, to kind of know about, you know, the artwork you make, the who, what, when, why, that kind of thing. All right, we are 20 minutes-ish over. You all definitely have our emails by now, so you know that you can reach out, we can Zoom. Noelle, thank you so much. Thank you all for staying. It's really a
Thank you.
thrill. All right, everybody, that's all I have for today. Have a great rest of the day, and I'll see you all